everyone. How is everyone? Wednesday, beautiful event, beautiful day. We'd all rather be outside. I will make this short and sweet. I'm Jeanne Allen, founder and CEO of the Center for Education Reform. I'm delighted to do a main stage pitch for you, if you will, about the Center for Education Reform, but I don't want you to really think about this so much as a pitch, as a way to maybe learn a little bit more about what we do on a day-to-day basis in the environment for education, opportunity, and innovation. Where am I targeting this to? Oh, there we go. So, why education reform, why education opportunity and innovation, you might ask. We've heard lots and lots about the challenges in our public education system, the challenges from pre-K through higher ed. It's always interesting and I think important to remind ourselves, we're in 2017 now. Prior to the 80s, American education was a fairly stable, static, effective for a lot of people. And much of the drive today in the change in what we do is a result of recognizing at a very clear point in time what it was that was going wrong in American education. Why am I not doing this? Is this, I'm sorry, I'm gonna be so rude. Did I just click it harder? Yes? Okay. So, what was happening that led to this point? Demographic shifts wreaked havoc on the stability that we were having in the 80s. You certainly had a number of, okay, this is not going to go really well. Can you go back one? Thank you. Actually, you know what? Teddy, I'm going to have you do those, and I'm just going to talk. We'll start over. This is why I don't love slides. So demographic shifts wreaked havoc on the stability that we were having. We were in the midst of the 80s. We had international competitiveness was challenging us, cleaning our clock in a way. Federal and state roles were evolving to take on and to support kids and students and adults who were not necessarily being cared for. There was an important role in eliminating racial discrimination and disparities, and all this served to kind of increase the amount of government and support for our kids. Very well intentioned. We thought most things were going pretty well. Urban districts, like in New Jersey, were paying somewhere upwards of $20,000 per student. You had more and more laws that were restricting the ability of people just to do what they wanted. And then just 4 years after the Department of Education was established came the landmark Nation at Risk report, which essentially uncovered that we had just rampant mediocrity, rampant failure in our schools. And you actually started looking at what we were doing with our kids. We required a lot of inputs, but there was not necessarily a lot of outputs. So what happened? The birth of education reform started pretty much in the 80s, and it started with standards. It started with charter schools and it started with standards. First and foremost, people started really questioning what is it that we are doing and what is it we could be doing differently. And charter schools, you've heard a lot about it. We heard Andre Agassi talk about his network. There's many people here. Some of you have participated in our sessions. The idea was really simple. How can we do education differently? How can we be more flexible? How can we allow for innovation? And I think that was interesting, that last slide. Time magazine, that was 1994, and it called charter schools a grassroots revolt. And indeed it was. I got to have I was on the ground floor of hearing from parents and legislators across the country saying, you know, what is it that we can do? What is it we can do differently? And this notion of charter schools that had begun to evolve in Minnesota and then Colorado and eventually Michigan, which is what this article was about, really took hold. And that was really the formative stage of my founding the Center for Education Reform. Like many of you who are innovators, educators, and the like, I just felt there was nothing out there, no other organization or group that actually was willing to roll up their sleeves and connect with people on all sides of the political aisle and really try to connect the policy and the practice. This other thing that was happening was just extraordinary. There were upwards of 5 to 6 different commissions, organizations, convenings with presidents starting in 1989 all the way through 1996. We had the first George Bush convene governors at Charlottesville. We had the National Education Goals Panel. We created Goals 2000 in 94. Lamar Alexander, who was governor of Tennessee, became head of the Senate Education Committee. On and on and on. 1996, 2001, 27 states had already adopted some sort of standards. The joke used to be that actually there was only one set of state standards and everyone would just rip the cover off of it and put their own name on it. because they did look fairly similar. There was not a hue and cry about we need national standards. It was all happening and evolving at the states. 2002, No Child Left Behind. 2009, we get introduced to the Common Core. Why? Let me just pause on that for a second. Because all those great standards that actually showed us, in comparison to what was happening with our country in 1983, those standards introduced an actual set of outcomes, requirements that we actually impart knowledge on kids, measured by a very, very loose set of means, but a very firm set of outcomes. And what ended up happening is Massachusetts, Colorado, other states like that at standards revealed that our kids actually still didn't know very much. That despite Nation at Risk in 1983, that despite all the activity that happened between that and the early 90s, these standards got enacted. Students started taking high-stakes tests and falling really on the floor, finding very little proficiency. And so a lot of states raced ahead. That's where a lot of states started adopting other reforms. Let's get students into schools that are more flexible or personalized. Let's help districts really innovate and do different things. And yet, at the same time, as that was a push and pull on the system, and choices were creating this competitive force, of which we were helping lead that charge because we just felt there needed to be a jolt for kids who didn't have that opportunity, the states started lowering their cut scores on their tests. And something that many of you know is you have a set of standards and you create a state test, and someone has to decide what actually is passing. Right? If 100% is passing on a traditional test, it might seem odd that 100% is actually not passing on a set of state standards. In fact, an assessment for state standards often was 62 to 65%. Passing meant you were proficient. And yet, there were so few people who were proficient, they started lowering the cut scores. And that's actually how we got the evolution of national debate on standards and Common Core. 2011, that continued. 2014, it really began to be challenged, even as it was going to its peak. People were feeling very constrained, very limited. What happens when you actually adopt? Albeit voluntarily. It was not a national mandate. It was a mandate if you wanted federal money for certain things. But what happens when you actually try to confine people to doing one set of outcomes? People begin to push back. Parents push back. Educators push back. Suddenly that cookie cutter system that we discovered in 1983 had actually given us what we called in Nation at Risk a rising tide of mediocrity, which actually demonstrated there was this huge gap that nobody talked about between urban and suburban. Suddenly these gaps were revealed. They were made worse in a way, revealed even more by the state standards. Then we wanted to push ahead to educate more and more people. We created much more decentralization systems, much more choices, Common Core, because it was being measured by a set of tests. Then many people felt constrained. And that's the world we are in right now. We're in a world in 2017 where we have seen no fewer than 15 different shifts, okay? Department of Education, 79, Nation at Risk, 83, 2017. 15 shifts in standards, national commitments, goals being adopted, states adopting things, choices coming in, and yet we've barely moved the needle. Most states across the country have fewer than 65% of their kids actually proficient, and that's when you're measuring grade level proficiency. Many of us here are talking about, why do we have certain grades? Why is 5th grade 5th grade? Why is 6th grade 6th grade? Why is higher education only when you get to a certain point? Why do we have seat times? And so we right now have had a pendulum shift again. And the most important thing that we can start talking about is what the potential for innovation is in the political environment today. The environment that says there's still a lot of people using the objectives and the learning and the teaching that was a result of Common Core. That's voluntary. There's now a new federal law that allows districts to be flexible. Many district superintendents argue to us all the time, Jeanne, what are you talking about? We've always had flexibility. There are a lot of people out there doing tremendous things because they're willing to challenge the status quo. But by and large, trying to actually unlock the potential for innovation in a system that's static has been a challenge. I don't have to tell a lot of you there. So 35 years ago, Nation at Risk captured our attention. I would argue that current events today, once again, have focused on the need and the opportunity, the leaps in technology, research, and what we can do as a result. And so what do we need to do? At the Center for Education Reform, we wake up every day focused on how we can blur the lines of distinction between these old archaic ideas of this is pre-K, this is 5th grade, this is higher ed. If I have a 14-year-old who should have that higher ed, why do I actually have to have him remain in a school for a certain confined period of time? If I have a 7-year-old who hasn't really cut it at what we think the mastery of early education should be, why is leaving back even a notion? Why is there not a drive towards more personalization? We talk about these things. We've heard lots of people ask us the questions, what do? You have to erase the lines of distinctions, which means you can't have things called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. You can't have career and technical education reauthorizations coming up, career and technical education. We have programs siloed at the federal level. So the best thing we can do is say to our lawmakers, why are we continuing? And Secretary DeVos alluded to this for those of you who were there yesterday. She alluded to this. I asked her about the reauthorization of the Higher Ed Act, and she said, I want to know why we're reauthorizing an act that's 55 years old and that maybe needs dramatic change. Why aren't we starting over? We talk a lot about starting over at the Center for Education Reform at the local, state, and federal level. It sounds like a heavy lift. It's not nearly as much as you think, which I'll talk about in a second. So in addition to erasing lines of distinction and really just having that conversation, opening up people's minds, we need to eliminate needless guidance. And that sounds like such a Washington bureaucratic mindset, right? Eliminate needless guidance. What does that mean? This is a very little known fact. There's absolutely no reason that anybody other than those of us who actually wake up every day in Washington, D.C., focused on policy and read all those things that enter your box that you never get a chance to read would know. But the vast majority of behaviors in and around our students at every single level are driven by not laws, not regulations stemming out of the laws that are passed at different levels, but by guidance that is typically created in response to people's questions. So for example, the professional development of teachers, funds at the federal level, teeny minuscule, federal level, 7 to 10%, depending on the program, of all public money spent. 7% professional development funds, a very small, multi-million-dollar program. District calls the Department of Education and says, hey, we're talking to so-and-so about buying a program to teach our teachers how to teach online and blended learning. Is that permissible under Title II, under the federal law? So the person answers the phone and says, let me check. The answer should be, is it something you want to do? Is there anything that's confining you? Are you dotting the I's, crossing the T's? Does it violate civil rights discrimination? Go for it. Let me get back to you. They convene a group of people. They're called regulators. We sit in a room. I've been in these meetings before. They talk about, is this permissible? Where does it say online? It's like taking a case to the Supreme Court. Where is it in the Constitution? Show me. And we become judicial activists at the federal level. There are literally thousands of pieces, small and long, short and long, of non-regulatory guidance that drives behaviors, and many people don't even know it's there. And so the best thing we could do is say, this is no cost, doesn't take a lot. We're hoping that the new federal review of regulations will uncover this. Is, you know what, all those things that you're doing in and around programs, we're just going to tell you, here's our expectation if you're using federal money, because we have to hold you accountable, and say to the states, you set your own tone, but don't come to us anymore and ask us what's permissible. Tell us what you've done, and we will stand by to help you challenge what's wrong and support what's right. Reducing barriers to a new teacher corps. It is a continual hue and cry out there. It is phenomenally positive to hear constantly people talking about that our biggest barrier to all the things we're talking about is a new pipeline of teachers, that we have a pipeline. How many people have heard that or talked about? Limited pipeline, have to help create, drive more teachers in the classroom. We've got to reduce the barriers. If you decide to become a teacher and you are fixed by certain rules and regulations at the state level. In fact, in order to get a master's or to be certified in a state, if you have to have certain laws that require you to go back to school, to be a teacher in the state of New York, you have to have a master's to have certification. If you have your certification in Kansas, you can't take it over the border. These kinds of rules drive people not to enter the teaching force at a time when many, many people are career changers. But even more importantly, the barriers to entering teaching is not about not having enough people willing and interested. Yes, there are tons of system changes we have to work on. We absolutely have to make the classroom more flexible, allow them to be more autonomous. We have to do things like you heard from Diane Taverner today from Summit Public Charter Schools, allowing people to actually create their classrooms together. Those things are hooked into barriers, right? But why is it that we cannot get over the fact that we can learn from Khan Academy online, we can learn through TED Talks, we can learn here with each other, we can guide our own education, but somehow a piece of paper and a praxis test that was created 30 years ago is the proxy for teaching. I would argue that if we reduce the barriers and started talking about innovation, the ability to drive classrooms, that the very people who oftentimes argue and push back on advocates of opportunity and choices would realize that many more people would actually join the fold and be able to grow and improve traditional public education. Allowing partnerships to help achieve universal access to the internet. I was never a big fan of broadband. People talk about E-rate. That's really nice. That's somebody else's issue. And then I started digging into the whole last mile, middle mile, gigabit trenches. I'm getting really dangerous with 5 terms. And what I'm finding out is that, yes, we have made so much progress, thanks in large part to the Obama administration. We've made so much progress in wiring schools and wiring institutions related to schools, but guess what? We don't have the communities around those kids wired the way we need to have them wired. We don't have them wired so that if you had an innovative school leader or a new school that wanted to start up, they could say, hey, don't worry about using a calculus teacher. I got one. You guys go set up your satellite school for the 20 kids that live 60 miles north of Cody, Wyoming's town, so that they don't have to get on a bus every day and come 60 miles. So I can save that money. Though you can't get a calculus teacher up there, we can share them. We can do a form of blended learning. We can do synchronous teaching, right? Talk about content. We've got some people in the room who are very big in content. There's a tremendous amount of content available. It's in books, but it's all over the internet. You can find knowledge anywhere. Why are we limiting the schools to only have what it is that the districts bought, that states required them to purchase? What more content could we drive if this notion of not just universal access, but this notion of can we use what we have with our kids on a regular basis to achieve the outcomes, regardless of how we get there? So that's how we are working to change the landscape. At the same time, we are trying to change the landscape to allow for more innovation. We have folded innovation into sort of our policy and advocacy work for opportunity. We are still running down this road that when I founded the center in 1983, or 1993, we decided we needed to provide more options and opportunities for kids outside the regular system. And that's what we do, that's what we raise money for, that's what we staff up for, those are the battles we engage in. And those kids in the here and now that do not have an option, I would argue anyone in this room who does not think that that is a powerful lever needs to go to a community where there are scholarships, voucher programs, and charters where kids have actually found an opportunity to be personalized and be supported. And it may not be for everyone. But we began to abandon the idea of helping ensure that full education leadership in our country was aided and abetted by innovation. And so we have a parallel path now where we work to knit all of us together, the opportunity agenda and the innovation agenda. Because as you heard someone say earlier today, innovation can only happen where you have nimble, flexible schooling environments. You can adopt innovations, but unless people have the ability to really drive and succeed, to test, to retest, the lean startup idea, to fail fast, we will not make the progress we need to get past 65% of our kids who are below, basic or below. We will not ever really push that. So we have to have this constant pressure, the same kind of pressure that we've seen traditionally in higher ed, that we're now seeing higher ed blow up around much easier because we don't have these governance confinements. So how do we do this? I want to spend my last few minutes telling you how we do it, because it's really important to me, and it's something I've overlooked before, and that's why I was grateful that Michael and Deborah allowed me to do this little talk. I want to make sure that you all know that there are a handful of groups like ours out there every day trying to make sure that we know what's happening so that we can translate this into policy changes. And it's not just about policy changes, it's actually fostering. So we talk about engaging, innovative approaches to teaching and learning. What we learn here, what we learn around the country, what we read about, we talk about. We talk about and we say, we can't tell you everything, we can't study it, we've only got, we've got 12 people. We've got a $3.5 million budget. Anyone wants to help, we're always happy to take more and grow. But that's not our job to know everything and be experts, it's our job to push you, to be that clearinghouse and that broker. So that's one way we do it. Our influence. Because we have 24 years under our belt, we're trying to extend that worldview of policy. If you walk into a congressman's office and start talking about bilingual education, start talking about education technology, start talking about early childhood education, talk about nutrition, they yawn, they've seen lobbyists, you've been in their rooms, it's not going to go over. There's zero. We've got programs. What are we going to do? You walk in their office and you say, I am trying to accomplish as much as I can to expand how kids learn, or their social emotional development, or I'm trying to drive content to teachers, or I'm trying to do blended learning, and I need help with you removing these kinds of barriers. You have a far different conversation. It might be a nutrition program, it might be an ed technology program, but we are helping, we want to turn you into advocates for innovation, not just marketing and organizational companies that want to make that change. And to do that, you have to be part of the influencing, and you have to help us make that happen. Driving innovation I've talked about, infrastructure, teaching and learning, any new ideas that we can find, any old ideas that nobody has heard about. Being able to get people to pressure them not to repeat the same mantra over and over again. Connecting, building relationships, brokering alliances constantly. We want to plug people in. If I had all the time in the world, I would put all of us in a room on a regular basis and just say, okay, now we all need to be talking, and then we need to be carrying that somewhere else. Guess what? Governors, state legislators, leaders of state education departments, school board members, members of Congress, they might be on a committee, but they're voting on stuff that actually helps or hurts our kids on a regular basis, and they don't know anything but what we tell them. And if we are not constantly helping promote what we do and sharing what we do, we will not make that change. Inspiring, pushing ideas out into the real world, really helping people say, you can do that, you actually should build that. No, why did you say that you can't actually market into a district? Why do you think you can't go talk to a member? What do you mean you can't talk to the press? Of course you can. And speaking of press, informing. I mean, we are constantly convening meetings, discussions, trying to broaden our support base. This is a tripartisan issue, education, innovation, and opportunity. But in order to drive change, you have to recognize that we have to be talking to people even if we think we don't agree on other issues. And finally, amplify. Not only promoting, as I've talked about, people like you to the policymakers, but the media. The media drive a majority of what we think and see. We're in 24-hour news cycles. Imagine if we had those news cycles 25 years ago, how much more advanced we'd be. We know what happens, we can dismiss it, we can move on, and then we've got to rebut it. But I will tell you that every reporter out there who covers or thinks they're covering education innovation, education technology, the knowledge universe, if you will, every one of those folks, again, they are limited by what you tell them, by what we share, and by what we know. Last year, CER had over, not how many impressions? 76 million impressions? 76 million impressions in the media, which means 76 million people read something that we were quoted in, produced, or talked about. That drives people to us, and this is our whole theory. This is our wheel. This is our wheel of change. It drives people to us. It helps us drive others. Finally, I just want to end with why we do this work and remind people what it is. And I'm going to have you take a look at a quick clip of a charter school who we got a contest submission from when John Oliver was actually beating up charter schools on the news, on his supposed comedy show. What it did is it backed everybody, and it pushed everybody that doesn't normally talk about these issues to think there was something wrong with them. Over 250 schools submitted videos like this, and this was just one of those innovative units. Go ahead, sorry.
These are the faces, the innocent faces that represent over 3 million. 3 million students who have fallen victim to a charter school education. This is Leonard.
That's Leonard.
Leonard is like any other student you know, except he attends Inlet Grove Community High School. In a recent segment of Last Week Tonight, John Oliver exposed the atrocities of choice education and charter schools. Unfortunately, our poor friend Leonard here attends a charter school. So please, join us. Join John Oliver. Help us with people like Leonard here. Stop choice education. Stop charter schools.
And that's why we support not just innovation, but opportunity. Because if those kids don't have an opportunity to work with those teachers to create schools like that, we will never demonstrate how to actually kick this challenge that we have and make sure we're successfully educating all learners at all levels. Thank you for your patience. I so appreciate your being here. Thank you.